Uh, okay.
Okay, welcome back to the 8 p.m. Haftarah class.
Mhm.
Uh, and the second in our seven Haftorot of Nechama, the Shivta de Nechemta of our Haftorot um, between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. And I'll share the source sheet. I wanted to explore, I know that we missed the first one last week, but I wanted to just take a little step back. I feel like Sherry knows that I've been like a little obsessed with the fact that these Haftorot have nothing to do ostensibly with the Parsha. I think it's such an interesting choice that we made to step totally away from the content to think about the flow of the year, because we do it in small ways throughout the year, right? We read a different Haftarah on certain Shabbatot on Rosh Chodesh or Erev Rosh Chodesh, but this feels like such a long stretch where we're reading something different than what we read in the Parsha. So I'm going to share the source sheet here. So I did just want to ground us in the Torah, right? The Torah is the predecessor or the teacher of the Shulchan Aruch, and he says that from Breshit ad Yadayim B'Tammuz, maftirin me'inyan haparshiot, right? That from Parshat Breshit until Shivat B'Tammuz, until the first fast that kicks off the 3 weeks, we follow the theme of the Parsha in the Haftarah. But from then on, Misham ve'elech lefi hazman, that we've really started to focus on the time period. Lefi ha'maorat tlata de puranuta, v'shiva de nechemta, right? So we talked about the three of discomfort, right, of rebuke that fall in the 3 weeks, and then the 7 of comfort, which were on week 2. And he outlines very early, right, for them to be outlined already in the tour and sort of unified, right? There are some times where we read different haftarot depending on where we're from or the minhag of our makom. But here, it seems like everyone is reading the same 7. And I tried to make it a little bit more clear by putting the name of the Haftarah in parentheses, in quotation marks, because instead of giving us the chapter and verse of the Haftarah, the tour does it by the name, which is usually it's sort of like the way we name Parshiot, it's the first words of the Haftarah. And all of the Haftarot come from of these 7 come from Sefer Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu is known as the prophet of comfort, so that part makes sense. But we don't read them in chronological order, right? It seems like if we were just trying to choose 7 comforting, hope-filled Haftarot, we would just work our way through Sefer Yeshayahu, but we jump back and forth constantly. And so there's a bit of a machloket about what is again, right, if we're taking this big break from the Parsha to talk about the time of year, what's the plan? What's the Haftarah's goal, sort of meta of these 7 weeks? So the Baal Machzor Vitri, which is a very old source, and I only brought it in the English here. I should have put the link to the Haftarah essay that I was reading, but he only brought it in the English. I couldn't find it in Hebrew. Right? He says they're all about comfort. And he says that we read them in the way that one comforts a human mourner slowly by stages. So I think that's an interesting idea, right? That the Haftarot are meant to help bring us out of mourning. Just like the 3 weeks help us sort of sink into sadness and mourning, we don't have many tools to bring us out. I think for a lot of us, that relief sort of just comes naturally. But the Haftarah is a tool to help us slowly recover from the trauma of the mourning at Tisha B'Av time. So the Baal Machzor Vitri says, right, what do we start with? If you start, right, someone who is too close to the time of tragedy is like one who predicts the future. Tomorrow you will be king, which the bereaved cannot believe, right? So the Baal Machzor Vitri is saying the goal is to get to the last 3 Haftarot, the Sing, O Barren One, right? The Rani Akara, the Arise and Shine, Kumi Ori, and then the last one of Sos Asis Atem, I Shall Rejoice. But that if we as Haftarah readers had read those first 3 first, after the trauma of celebrating Tisha B'Av, we wouldn't believe it. It's like not possible. There has to be like a path that slowly brings us there. And so therefore we start with Nachamu, which is what we read last week. We go on to V'tomar Tzion, which is what we read this week, and we'll look at it a little more closely. Although Tzion is destroyed, do not say she is abandoned. And since Hashem has now comforted Tzion, right? We don't call for mercy again. It's just comfort. And then from onwards, God begins to comfort the people directly, right? Once she has received consolation, we follow with the last three. So I think that's an interesting piece, which is just important to remember. In general, I think the news that came out of Israel today was bittersweet in the sense that it is good that we recovered 6 people. But as I was reading all of their bios, even though we knew many of them had already been murdered, it brings up sadness again, right? That sadness, leaving grief is a process. And we can't do it right away. And just like it might feel a little bit artificial to sink ourselves into mourning over 3 weeks, it's important to do that to really get the most out of Tisha B'Av. And so too, the Torah is saying we have to bring ourselves out of mourning. We can't just immediately, otherwise it feels more pretend, I think, right? If the day after Tisha B'Av or 2 days after Tisha B'Av, you get up and it's like it never happened, it's like acknowledging that nothing happened on Tisha B'Av. But if we truly experience the sadness of Tisha B'Av, then we need these 7 weeks to come out, and the Haftarah is here to help us. So I happen to like this interpretation. I think that it's a very deep psychological insight, and it's important for this time of year, and it's also important to remember that we sometimes have to come slowly. Grief cannot be rushed. It's okay to need time before we're ready for that like sort of triumphant finale. The Avudraham is not really a machloket, but sort of just a different perspective, which I think is interesting. He suggests that the way that the Haftarah are scheduled is like a conversation, right? Hashem says, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, right? Hashem is saying, go comfort the people to the Nevi'im. And then V'tomar Tzion, right, which is the next one, this one, is a response, right? The Knesset of Yisrael responds, saying, Hashem has abandoned me. How could I possibly feel comforted at this moment, right? I.e., she is not consoled by the comfort of the prophets. And then where the Haftarah is a stormy, afflicted one will not be comforted, right? That's as though the Nevi'im are turning back to Hashem saying, I'm sorry, we tried, but they're not, Bnei Israel is not appeased by our consolations. And so then God has to turn back and say, I am your comforter, right? And then once there's been this dialogue of like, you should feel comforted, but I don't feel comforted yet, try again, Hashem, the Nevi'im say, then Hashem is able to say, Rani Akara, right? Rejoice, O barren one. And also Uri, Kumi Uri, and then finally Sos Asis, right? And so there's some sort of dialogue, like pushback, like it seems like Hashem is ready to move on here, and the people are not. Right? God is saying, okay, let's move on. And Bnei Israel is saying, we're not yet comforted. We need more time. So I think that's an interesting idea, thinking about the Haftarah helping us understand the sort of natural dialogue that might have taken place in the years after the Churban. So that is all. I'm ready to move on unless anyone has questions, but to say, this is a funny time of year. But I think the Haftarah realized, maybe the Torah and the people who put together the Haftarah realized that this was an opportunity to address a real need that was not being met at this time of year, right? In the 3 weeks, you have all kinds of practices that are supposed to help us ease into mourning. No haircuts, no music, no meat, right? As time progresses, then no food on Tisha B'Av, but there are less or no practices that sort of take you out of that. And so the Haftarah maybe is stepping into what was a void or a perceived void, where we needed a little bit more handholding. So that being said, I do think that there are some interesting connections to Parshat Eikev, which we can go through, and then a few other sort of interesting points, which maybe are here as well. Anyone want to weigh in on the timing conversation before we move on? Okay. Okay, so I think that there are 2 themes, or one theme maybe expressed in 2 ways that resonate between the Haftarah and the Torah reading. So I think I put these out of order. In our parsha, in Parshat Eikev, we will read these psukim about Hashem's anger flaring up, right? V'chara af Hashem bachem. And that the result of that, what happens when God is angry, v'atzar et hashamayim, right? God closes the skies, v'lo yeh matar v'ha'adama lo titenet tivula. And so then there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce. V'avadatem mehera me'al ha'aretz hatova asher Hashem noten lachem. And you will soon perish from this land that Hashem is assigning to you. So I think the first part that is interesting, and I tried to sort of keep the parsing of the psukim without taking up too much space, right? But Hashem calls out, right? It seems like we have been lured away because Hashem says, "Madua bati? Why did I come? Ve'ein ish karati, ve'ein oneh." Right? Why, when I called, no one came, no one responded, right? And God says, you can imagine sort of a not satire, a sarcastic question, right? Is my hand too short to rescue you? Right? God is frustrated. God is impatient. I'm ready to move on, right? When you think about the Avudraham's Midrash, I'm ready to move on and you are not here. What's going on? And then God says, perhaps in an echo of this week's Haftarah, right? What will happen when I'm angry that you have not come? Naharot midbar, right? That with a mere rebuke, sorry, I started in the wrong place. Right, with a mere rebuke, I dry up the sea and turn the rivers into desert. This is like to me, this is like a resonance of Tisha B'Av, right? That God will dry up the seas and turn the rivers into desert, and that the fish will be lying there dead of thirst on the ground. It's really a disturbing image. I feel like often when I think of Israel and sort of like the wonder of the desert, I think of flash floods, right? But a flash flood leaves a lot of sort of weird debris in its midst. If you've ever been to see one, I saw one once. It's really crazy, right? That when that dries up suddenly, anything that had come along with the water is now gone. So this idea that if we don't listen, God will dry up our land. But if we do listen, right, sort of the other side of the coin, right, God says, Ki Hashem Elokecha mevi'echa el eretz tova, right? God brings you to a good land. Eretz nachle mayim, right? Again, I think very similar. Now it's a land with streams and springs that come out of every plain, bakiva ovahar, and every hill. So when you don't listen, the land is dry. When you do listen, the land is one of streams and springs and fountains that issue from everywhere. And similarly, although maybe a stretch, I don't know, I'm curious what you guys think, right? Yeshayahu says, Ki nicham Hashem Tzion, nicham kol charotaha v'yasem midbara ke'eden. Right, that God has truly comforted Zion. He's comforted all of her ruins and made her wilderness like Eden. And her desert like the garden of God. And so perhaps we can understand that Gan Eden and Israel are mildly synonymous here, meaning, Israel should always be like a Gan Eden. And so using these words is sort of similar to this idea, right? That when God has comforts us and has pity on us, God brings us into a land that is filled with water. And what happens then? It's such a beautiful way to end our Haftarah. Right? That gladness and joy shall abide there. Todah v'kol zimra. Thanksgiving and the sound of music. So the Haftarah gives us this beautiful flow chart, right? Pun intended, I guess, right? That when we don't listen, things are dry. But when we do listen, the water flows and we hear the sounds of all of the resulting joy and gladness that comes from that. And that is an echo in both the Torah reading and the Haftarah. So I do think that even though it's not necessarily chosen to accompany Eikev because of the content, certainly these Prakim of Yeshayahu do have at least some similar themes or motifs. And again, it's just, I think often the Haftarah picks beautiful ways to to finish. And this is truly such a beautiful way to think of the land of Israel filled with gladness and joy and the sound of music. So if each one is meant to end on a high note and each high note takes us higher, this is such a beautiful high note to end on. Any thoughts, ideas before we move on to the third sort of section here? Okay. Okay, so the last thing was, as I was going through this part of Yeshayahu, it's just such a rich text, and I couldn't help but bring a few ideas that are not related to Eikev or necessarily to comfort, but I just thought were beautiful, and hopefully they'll enhance our hearing of the Haftarah on Shabbat. So the first is, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not note that there is an interesting parallel here that we don't often see. We often see God as the parent and us as the children, but this is about a mother and baby instead of a father and child. And I think as we sort of pivot, right, as this is helping us pivot towards Rosh Hashanah, there's an interesting echo. Maybe someone will tell me what they hear here to a Rosh Hashanah text that we read. Right, so Yeshayahu says, "Hishtakach isha ulamerechem ben bitna." Right, can a woman forget her baby or disown the child of her womb? Gam ela tishkachacha va'anochi lo eshkachech. Right, though she might forget, I could never forget you, God is saying. And this is just beautiful. Hein al kapayim chakofticha chamotayich negdi tamid. That I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are ever before me. I think that's such a beautiful idea. There in the Gemara, when they talk about eruv and what you can carry outside of the eruv, they talk about these necklaces that women seem to have that were like a skyline of Jerusalem. And when I read this, I thought of like, so what a beautiful way to emulate God inscribing our walls on God's palms, whatever that means, that women would wear these necklaces of Yerushalayim that were sort of similar. We engrave that on our hearts. Sorry, that was a digression. What were we talking about? Oh, right. So what is the story? Does anyone have a story that pops into their head? A Rosh Hashanah preview here? Okay, I'll tell you. I think that it is an echo of the Hagar story. That Hagar is the mother, and that on the one hand she is not forgetting her child, as right Ishmael is suffering after they've been sent away by Abraham. But on the other hand, right, when the Malach comes to her, there does seem to be like an element of rebuke there, and so I think that is similar to this, right? A woman forgetting her child as her child is suffering, and God is saying, I would not forget. She might forget the real sort of flesh and blood mother, but I would not forget you. I never could forget you. In some ways, it's like such a beautiful love letter from Hashem. And then I found this fascinating Gemara in Brachot, so I felt compelled to bring it here, which plays with this idea from the pasuk of Gam Ela Tishkachna, right? That what does it say here, right? Though she might forget, I could never forget. Gam Ela Tishkachna, she might forget, but Anochi, I, God, lo eshkachacha, that I will not forget. And so the playing here is like, what is the this and the that, right? What was forgotten and what was remembered? And so the Gemara says that maybe the thing that is forgotten is the sin, right? We imagine that Bnei Israel is talking to Hashem, and they say, Ribono shel olam, ho'il ve'ein shichacha lifnei kisei kvodecha. Since there is no forgetfulness before your chair, Shema lo tishkach li ma'aseh ha'egel. Like, are you never going to forget my sin of the golden calf? It's such a vulnerable moment in this imagined conversation, right? Like, we've made the biggest mistake, and now it will forever mar our record, right? Which certainly some people have the practice not to wear gold jewelry on Yom Kippur. Like, we certainly carry that with us. But in this conversation between God and Bnei Israel, Amar la gam ela tishkachna. These two shall be forgotten. These is a reference to the golden calf, right? Meaning that God is saying, don't worry, I'll forget about that. And you can imagine that tenderness maybe of a parent relationship or a relationship with a child or a niece or a nephew, right? Where they say, I really screwed up. Are you going to be annoyed with me forever? And you're like, no, of course not. It's already forgotten, right? There's like such a tenderness. But then they're nervous. Ribono shel olam, amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam, ho'il v'yeshicha lifnei kisei kvodecha. Well, if you can forget things on your throne, shema tishkach li ma'aseh Sinai, will you forget that beautiful, amazing, deep, right, powerful moment of positivity around the revelation at Har Sinai? And so here, right, so definitely she might forget. That's the Egel. But Amar La, God says back to the people of Israel, V'anochi lo eshkachech, right? That I will not forget. And so it's this beautiful idea, and the Gemara quotes it in the name of Rabbi Elazar who says it in the name of Rabbi Oshaya, that what does this mean? My dichtiv gam ela tishkachna ze ma'aseh ha'egel v'anochi lo eshkachech ze ma'aseh Sinai. That in this pasuk there is this, I think, like this very powerful idea that God will let go of the bad things and remember the good things. God is not someone who remembers everything, so you'll be punished forever for your mistakes. And God is also not someone who forgets everything, so you'll lose the zechut of having Har Sinai. Again, in this sort of love letter idea that God engraves us on God's palms, I think the idea that God has a selective memory, latova, right, like for our good, is so powerful. It's such a beautiful idea to bring to us. And now I quoted, there's a little bit of repetition between some of the quotes, but this is the last three psukim of our Haftarah again. And God here references Abraham and Sarah, right? Shim'u Elai, listen to me. Rodfei Tzedek, right? Also maybe referring to some others, right? Aaron is known as a Rodef Tzedek, right? But you who pursue justice, you, the children of maybe Aaron, definitely will see Abraham and Sarah, Mvakshei Hashem, those who seek God. Hibitu el tzor chutzuvatam, right? Look to the rock you were hewn from. El makevet bor nikretzam, the quarry you were dug from, right? Look back, hibitu el Avraham avicham ve'el Sarah, to Avraham your father and to Sarah, to cholelchem, who brought you forward. Ki echad kretiv v'avrachehu ve'arbahu. For he was the only one I called him, and I blessed him and made him many. And I think this is interesting. The commentary that I was reading suggests that perhaps the prophet is suggesting that Abraham and Sarah are the first Babylonian exiles. Right, when they go to live in Ur Kasdim, they are like the exiles, and so and the last thing I want to talk about is sort of dating this part of Yeshayahu. But no matter who Yeshayahu is talking to, he's certainly talking to people who have been exiled, and so it seems like he's saying Abraham and Sarah had to do it also, and yet they went right back to Israel. Right, when God called them, they followed, and it sounds like perhaps it comes from this frustration, this question that we talked about before, that God is saying, look, you said you were so sad, and then when I called to you, no one came, no one responded. Like you hear that sort of empty echo. And considering that God comes forward saying, I'll forget all the bad things, I'll remember all the good things, like, but where are you? Right? Which again, I think as we turn towards Rosh Hashanah, that is the question. Where are you? And so to remember Abraham and Sarah as the first exiles, I think is maybe an interesting way of thinking about where we come from, where we're going, how that informs our values, how we should learn from those mistakes. I will say that I felt that was a little bit rosy. Abraham does like a lot of running around outside of Israel, right? Getting Lot, going down to Egypt, coming back, leaving again, and I'm trying to remember the name of the commentary I was reading that suggests that every time Abraham leaves Israel, he loses a little part of it, right? God promises all of Israel to him, and then every time he comes home, he has to like fight another war, and he gets a slightly smaller piece. And the suggestion was that that Abraham has to choose between land and family, and he constantly chooses family in a way that doesn't work out for him. It's sort of a tragic element to the Abraham story. And that God says, like, just come back. I want to give you Israel. And every time it's a smaller Israel, and that Abraham, it takes him a long time to sort of catch on to that. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it did occur to me that like if Abraham and Sarah are the first exiles, we don't have to hold them up on a pedestal and say, well, they went back immediately and everything was fine. It's hard, it's complicated. There are lots of things that hold you back from making Aliyah or being in Israel or reclaiming the land, but eventually they got it right. And so to me, that's like even more comforting than thinking of them as these perfect exiles who go back right away. So I think that the final question is, who are we talking to here? Who are the people who are not responding? Who are the people who are supposed to be like Avram and Sarah? So I think there are two choices here. The first choice is that Yeshayahu is prophesying to the people before they return, before the 10 tribes return to Israel. Right. And so he's speaking to them. And we know from reading some of the later prophets that people did not return in the volume that we might have hoped for at that moment. And so certainly Yeshayahu could be talking to them, right? God is saying, I came, I called, I restored the Beit HaMikdash, I restored the people and the land, and you all stayed outside of Israel. But the other possibility is that Yeshayahu is actually not talking about his own reality, but he is talking about the final exile and redemption, which is to say he's talking to us, right? Maybe a much earlier version of us, but a post-second exile, not post-first exilic people. And in that case, even more than the first case, I think we can really hear the echo of that question, right? I came and no one responded. And it reminds me that we are moving towards Shabbat Mevarchim for Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? We talk about how Elul is the time where Hamelech Basadeh, right? Where God comes to us, God enters the field, God leaves the castle behind and comes down to where the people are. And that if we can take advantage of that moment, right? This is the moment when we can get close to God. And then on Rosh Hashanah, we're not strangers. We're not random petitioners from God's, county, as in the theory, in the mashal of the king, but we're intimate subjects, and that we are at an advantage. And so I think that the Haftarah is not just bringing us out of sadness and despair around Rosh Hashanah, but is starting to help us make that pivot towards Rosh Hashanah, is reminding us that when God comes, we need to be there. We need to answer the call. We need to be ready. Because that is what will bring us back to this idea, right, of simcha, sason v'simcha, and todah v'chol zimra, and that without going halfway, we're not going to get there. And it's a mistake that we've made time and time again. And so Yeshayahu is like beating that drum, right? He's saying, go back, answer God, be like Abraham and Sarah, go back. And that we can answer that in many ways. Making Aliyah is wonderful, but also thinking about it through the Rosh Hashanah lens is thinking about how do we come back to a relationship with Hashem. Like a mother-daughter relationship, a father-son relationship, the relationship of two who are in deep love with each other, right? Who have that ability to forget the bad and remember the good and inscribe each other on our hands. I think is such a beautiful goal that we should be striving for at every time of year, and especially at this time of year. So that is my read of Yeshayahu, but I welcome everyone's ideas and thoughts. A quiet crowd. Well, while everyone thinks of their ideas, if they have any, I'll just make a pitch because I mentioned Elul that we're doing a really wonderful Elul Beit Midrash this year. There'll be 4 sessions every Monday. They are in person only, unfortunately, for some of us. Although I will try to do one sort of similar session online. Date to be determined. But every Monday, the first 4 Mondays of September, leading up to Rosh Hashanah, each week we'll explore a different part of our tefillah and nusach. So if you come, there's an optional dinner to start at 7:30, and then at 8 o'clock, we'll jump into chavruta, so that we can learn together. If you want to come, I ask that you RSVP, especially by filling out the form for a chavruta match so that we can match you to a good chavruta. It just asks for some of your background and what you're looking for in a chavruta and what you want to bring to the chavruta, right? Just like very small questions. And that then we can They'll come together to sort of finish so everyone can like see where the teacher's minds was moving. The first one is about Teshuvah and Elul. The second will be about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. The second one will be about Slichot. The third one will be about the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. And the last one will be about Hoshanot and Sukkot. And the idea being that if we can prepare for this Zman together, and we'll do some singing at the end, so everyone's sort of familiar with some of our tunes and davening, that then we can really be ready when it's Rosh Hashanah to welcome God, to meet God where we are. So I highly recommend it. There is a small fee associated with the program, but if that is at all a problem, please let me know. We're happy to waive it. If you want to come to dinner, we do have to ask for you to pay for dinner, but otherwise, please do not let the cost be a barrier. I think it will be a wonderful program, 4 weeks, 4 Mondays in Chavruta. Really great. Okay, happy to pivot back to the Haftarah if anyone has any ideas, or to say good night and Shabbat Shalom if that's it tonight. Okay, well, I wish everyone a week of comfort and a week of hearing the happiness and joy surrounding us and of turning to Hashem. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Wish you the
Thank you, Rabbanit.
We wish you the same. Thank you. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Very enlightening.
Thank you.